Welcome to this week's episode of COD Fun. We are back from winter break.
And this semester of COD Fun, we are sadly not going to be focusing around the COD franchise.
We're going to be
anymore.
expanding a bit more into the different games. Maybe even if you guys want to put in suggestions, it is all up to you guys. If we have experience with games, we're going to try to cover them. Just to broaden the scope instead of just what we're doing Call of Duty. We're going to be hitting Call of Duty every so often, but we want to try and change it up. Which this week we're going to be going with Subnautica, which at least December 16th of 2014.
And it had a rating of 10 out of 10 on Steam. So that is pretty impressive for when it was made in 2014.
Yeah, and for a game, it had sold more than 6 billion million copies.
And it is a single-player game. There's probably something you can add to make a multiplayer, like some sort of mod. If you
there's plenty of mods out there, especially for Steam. Now, out of recent, I am actually starting a hardcore run of the game. And just going through that all, going back to collecting all the materials, scanning the stuff, you're getting to see all the fauna and flora, swimming around. It really immerses you into this, ocean world.
Well, swimming around is fun and all until you catch up to one of those leviathans. Then it's not fun anymore.
Yeah, you get the good old leviathans, of course. Which you start off the game, you're running in a life pod, you got your dude in there, and then he immediately gets hit in the head by a chunk of metal. And then his PDA ends up getting corrupted, so he loses a lot of the recipes, which then you're going throughout the game actually trying to get a decent amount to build yourself up. Then eventually you branch out from the life pod when you get the habitat builder. And it's a lot about collecting resources, food, and staying alive. There's also the big mystery behind a lot of the stuff in-game. Every so often you'll get these radio transmissions from the other life pods.
I kind of wish they would have done more of a multiplayer aspect because that would have made it so much funner.
Well, back when they were developing the game, I think there were some sort of limitations that had made that a little tougher to do. And it wasn't the game they were going for. I personally love it as a single-player game. Which, as I said, the creepy atmosphere of just going around, the impressive soundtrack, like you had just heard right at the beginning, called Abandoned Ship. Eventually in the game, you'll end up building it's called the Cyclops, which it's a one-man submarine. That music plays when the thing is on fire.
Sirens blaring, lights flashing, running around.
It's just utter adrenaline going throughout that.
It's almost as nostalgic as 115. It depends on how much you grew up playing.
Yeah. As I said, the soundtrack, I would say, is probably one of the best things about this game, but also just the exploration. The life pods, every so often you'll get a transmission on your radio. It does good at making a natural progression. Nearby the life pods, you then have things that you can scan or caves to go in. It progresses the story in its own way. Then, of course, you also have the trading ship, the Sunbeam, that will be contacting you towards the beginning, which I'm going to try to stay away from spoilers on what exactly happens to the Sunbeam in this case. Because we won't be talking about the story too much today, just talking about the overall aspects of the game.
Gameplay, aspects of the game, not the story.
Yeah, because a big thing about the game is the sea glide, I would have to say. Because your first priority, I would say, getting a survival knife, getting an oxygen tank, and getting some fins to swim around with.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you're grabbing these small little fish, these aliens. Of course, you got the peeper, the big eye and such. Got the bladderfish, probably my favorite, just for the sole reason of its utility. You can use that thing, make water out of it, and food. It's multi-purpose. Yeah. And of course, you're going around, you're getting resources and stuff, you're building up your own equipment. Which I said, we're not touching too much about the story today. It's just, I love the progression of it.
I do like games that are grindy. I love grinding games.
I said, the way it's grindy is just the resources.
Yeah.
Because you have your oxygen that you got to keep track of, and eventually you could just end up drowning. Now, of course, I have a friend who never uses the air bladder. When you activate it, which it takes a bladder fish and silicone rubber to make. When you activate it, it will fire you up to the surface while releasing air. And it's that thing has saved me so many times. And of course, as you're collecting resources, you always want to be careful of the crash fish. Which you're going to need to go tango with those suckers to make or to get sulfur, because in their little pop-out nest, that's where sulfur is. Now, if you're lucky, you can actually try to knife one of them, but I would not suggest it just with how much damage those suckers do when they explode. So do not try to run from one unless you got a sea glide, because otherwise they're just going to chase you down, especially in the caves. It's typically when you find one, you find a bunch of them. And then, of course, one of the first things you'll also see is the creepvine forest with the stalkers in them. The stalkers, these aliens, they got like a large mouth and they'll chase after you. They have like stages, the stalking stage and the hunting stage. And the stalking stage, they'll just be around the player, they're watching you and stuff. They're going to keep an eye on you and follow you. And then when they attack, they're going to full-on charge at you and start doing their attacks. Now, a big tip for anybody who needs it, if you have metal salvage in your inventory, put in your hotbar, drop it when it's around them, and it'll pull the aggro away, which that's also how you can get stalker teeth, is if a stalker bites on metal salvage, which there's metal salvage all around the area, which you can then turn into titanium, which is used for a lot of building stuff. And then, of course, like the biggest thing you're going to need, probably with just about any piece of equipment, is 2 acid mushrooms and a copper ore just for a battery. It's getting started off. But going back a little bit to the beginning here, I said when you first crash down, it's like, oh yeah, your life pod's on fire. You need hurry up, need to grab an extinguisher, put out the fire, and your radio's broken, your secondary systems are broken, and your first priority, typically, I would say, is making a repair tool.
And Subnautica reminds me a lot of No Man's Sky, if you ever played that.
I'm not.
It's basically like Subnautica with planets.
I said, and also just the eeriness of the feeling, because it's like all of these other crew members, you'll eventually reach their life pods, and it's like nobody's there, just their stuff's left behind. You have no clue what has happened to them.
And that is an awfully cool aspect of the game.
And it's like it experiments with the fact there's no NPCs really, except for like something towards the end of the game, which, as I said, we ain't gonna really touch upon much in this episode. We're just more dissecting how the game is. But like going to the life pods, getting the PDAs, you'll hear a bit of a log, and it's like you're thinking about these people surviving around you, and they're just ending up getting wiped out before you even reach. Because also, you don't know how much time there was between when you had crashed and you had awoken. Now, of course, when your thing was on fire, it probably wasn't too long. But you're focusing more on your own survival than looking for other crew members at the start until you start getting other stuff. So as I said, it builds that world building as you hear the other people's voices and stuff. You get to learn a bit of the story about the Aurora's crew. Now, you don't learn too much about how you were a part of it, but as I said, it's overall interesting, the world building. Just all these other survivors, you never see any of them, but it's like you know they're around you. You know that their life pods are out there, but you are the only one that survives.
Yeah.
And it's like you are the sole survivor of the Aurora's crashing. And one of the biggest things towards the start of the game, I believe it's on day 4, is the Aurora just explodes. Which after this explosion of the Aurora, you gotta be careful of radiation now. It adds a whole nother element to the environmental danger that's around. You can't go too close to the Aurora without getting the damage. Now, as I said, this doesn't go too much into the story, I would say, but you have to eventually will go in and repair the Aurora.
Yeah.
Which is a very dangerous task to do, especially early game, to where because as soon as the Aurora blows up, you immediately get the schematics for radiation. That is practically the only way you're making it in there.
Yeah.
Is some lead and I believe fiber or something like that.
Fiber, probably.
And it's like, that's practically the only way. Because otherwise, the radiation, it just eats down your health. You'll be dead in a matter of minutes, probably.
Yeah.
Which those minutes are not enough time, especially as you go throughout the Aurora. Now, the biggest thing you're going to need to find first, this would be one of my tips I'd suggest, is finding a laser cutter. There is so many things in the game that need a laser cutter, which it's understandable. It's a lot of the wreckages. Now, if you ever come across wreckages and such, I would suggest for you to look for a vent. There's typically a vent that just avoids the door that you can swim through. Which, of course, in these wreckages, you can find, scannable stuff. There's a lot of boxes you'll find around. Like, that's how you're going to look for the sea. Actually, yeah, fragments of the sea moth, but they're not in the boxes. The sea glide you end up finding in the boxes inside.
Could you explain what happens if you die?
Oh, if you die, okay, so it all depends on what mode you're in. So survival mode, if you just die, you go back to, like, your base and such, and then you lose a few of your items. Which, keep in mind, it is not that hard to die if you are not being careful. I said that O2 meter can flick down faster than you're paying attention, and then you'll just be gone. It's the whole point of drowning underwater.
Yeah.
It's almost a little terrifying of a thought. It instills that fear into you that you have to be careful. You got to watch your O2, otherwise you could drown. Which that's why throughout the game, which this is what I love about the life pods. The life pods bring you to different portions of the map. They direct you to places you need to go, and they have recipes and such for things that are best to craft, like a higher capacity O2 tank.
Yeah.
Now, actually, I find myself wrong, I believe, on that one, as you just automatically unlock that one. But the Ultra Glide fins actually are one that you find from a data box.
And then, like, you get the bigger and better stuff to move faster, and then...
Yeah, you move faster, you get more defenses, you stop being scared of the average stalker, and then you start moving up to things like the Reaper Leviathan. As I'm not going to go too in-depth on that one, just if you ever decide to be funny and head to the Aurora really early on. Now, if you get the Seamoth, be prepared to lose that Seamoth pretty quickly, as it grabs a hold of the Seamoth and just drags you around for fun for a little bit. The thing is aggressive.
Scary.
Now, another thing about how Subnautica deals with world borders. You have something called the Ecological Dead Zone, which is just called the Void, where ghost leviathans are. They are practically like 4 times the size of that submarine you can get. They swim around, do massive damage, and they will instantly aggro upon you. There's a few people who have done the jump to where you just jump off the side of the world in a prawn suit, which the prawn suit is also a really nice thing that you can access recipes for it in the Aurora. But, yeah. As I said, there's plenty of other things we could go into depth in the game. As I said, I ain't really touching upon the story all too much.
We don't want to spoil it for anybody who's trying to play it.
Yeah, it is an old game, I understand, but it's the environmental storytelling that really gives it credence. It helps add to the world around you. It enhances everything. Which, of course, I know we say that having friends on a game will always make it better. As this is one of the games that, yes, you cannot have friends there. You can still have friends talk to you. They can still be right alongside you, fearing the crap out of it, but it's, I would say, one of the better single-player picks.
But I think that, like, the worst part of it is that it is single-player. But given its era, it's understandable.
Yeah, I said 2014, it was an early access for the longest time. Now, I'm not sure if me and Gavin here will be discussing its sequel, Below Zero. I got that for Christmas, and I've been playing that a little bit, but I have just recently gotten back into the original one, just because the massive differences between the two games. But otherwise...
That should end for today's episode. We will try to do a new game next week or continue this one. We will find out.
Yeah. Have a good day, folks.